We begin this news hour in Gaza, where pressure is mounting on both Israel and Egypt to reopen the crucial Rafah border crossing. While talks are expected in Cairo between Egypt, the U.S. and Israel, hundreds of aid trucks are stuck in Egypt. And for weeks now, food supplies have been rotting in the sun after Israel took control of the crossing last month. And with aid unable to reach Gaza, the humanitarian situation is worsening for thousands of vulnerable Palestinians. Control over border crossings, especially at Rafah, has been a sticking point in ceasefire talks. Mohammed Val begins our coverage.
The Rafah border crossing is Gaza's only point of access by land that doesn't pass through Israel. For the Palestinians, it's a vital economic and humanitarian lifeline. But it's also a symbol of freedom and sovereignty. Israel has controlled it directly or indirectly since 1967. Even when it announced its forces were leaving Gaza in 2005, the movement of goods and people through the crossing remained subject to Israeli approval. Under international law, controlling the borders of a territory is considered an occupation. And Palestinians argue that the occupation is the reason they're in conflict with Israel. Earlier last month, the Israeli army took direct military control of the Rafah crossing. Israel says it was a necessary part of its preparations for a full-scale invasion of the city of Rafah in a final bid to defeat Hamas and other resistance groups. The move further complicated efforts to bring desperately needed humanitarian aid into Gaza and allow people requiring emergency medical care to be evacuated outside the besieged strip.
WFP is calling for all border crossings and crossing points within Gaza to be open as the Israeli incursion in Rafah continues to have a devastating impact on civilians and our own humanitarian operations. Our friends at the World Food Programme warn that there is little the agency can currently do in Rafah, with stocks very low and mobility severely restricted.
The UN, the US and Egypt have been pushing for the immediate reopening of the Rafah and Karam Abu Salim crossings. The latter, at the southeastern tip of the Gaza Strip, is mainly used by trucks carrying humanitarian aid. It's fully under Israeli control. A key focus of current ceasefire talks is deciding the future status of the Rafah crossing. Egypt insists Palestinians should control it. Israel is adamant Hamas and other resistance groups should never be allowed to be in charge, claiming they could use it to smuggle in weapons. While efforts to start ceasefire talks continue, Palestinians say the restoration of life in Gaza will be impossible without the Israeli blockade being lifted. Mohammed Val, Al Jazeera.
And Tareq Abu Azzoum joins us now live from Deir el-Balah in central Gaza. Tareq, what impact has the closing of the crossing had on Palestinians in the south?
Well, Layla, the ongoing closure of crossing borders, especially the Rafah crossing, has prevented the humanitarian aid flow into the Gaza Strip, including food, water, medical supplies alongside with fuel. It means that famine is imminent, and this is a clear result of the Israeli military operation in Rafah. We need to remember clearly that citizens are suffering from severe levels of malnutrition alongside with food insecurity, and that is absolutely contradictory to the international humanitarian law, which stipulates that any occupying power is responsible for securing food supplies and even securing the needs of the occupied nation, as well as the Israeli ongoing control of these borders have also brought negative impact on the ability of UNRWA and the humanitarian organizations to keep operating on the ground, specifically that they prevented any kind of aid to get into the strip, and the recently established floating dock did not sufficiently and effectively work within the past period, specifically that a very limited numbers of humanitarian aid trucks had entered the Gaza Strip, and that are completely loaded with food supplies that can't match the immense needs of Gaza's population. In light of this ongoing control, the medical sector in the Gaza Strip is absolutely grappling and is on the verge of complete collapse due to the ongoing prevention of basic supplies entry to the Gaza Strip. And this is a systematic military campaign that aims to completely impose medical, humanitarian and military siege on more than 1.5 million Palestinians across the Strip.
And of course, people further up north are also in dire need of humanitarian aid. What conditions are Palestinians facing?
Well, generally, population and people, families in the north of the Strip have endured much since October the 7th. The pre-time of the conflict, pre-October the 7th, there was no any kind of famine across the Strip. But with the initial months of the Israeli war on the Gaza Strip, the Israeli war cabinet has prevented any kind of essential food, water, and even fuel supplies entry to the Gaza Strip, and that gradually had completely deteriorated the humanitarian situation as families there are trapped under the Israeli fire. They have been internally displaced multiple times and now ending up living in evacuation centers that was already raided and invaded by the Israeli army in western areas of Gaza Strip. They are, as we have been talking to locals there, they have been confirming that they are struggling to get food as the depletion of food stocks started to take place in the north of the Strip. Alongside that, they are also grappling with finding pure sources of water due to the destruction of water wells in northern Gaza. So people there are in a big cage. It means that they are unable to get the basic supplies, and at the same time, if they are not killed by the Israeli fire, they might die due to the ongoing malnutrition that they are suffering from, and dehydration as well, Layla. Siraj Yassin has leukemia and needs urgent treatment abroad. But Israel's war and blockade on Gaza is stopping that. His mother can only watch as his son's condition worsens.
My son Siraj was a normal boy. He was a very good student. He fell sick 2 months ago. I took him to the hospital and they diagnosed him with leukemia. He can't walk and started using a wheelchair 2 weeks ago. He is in constant pain. We give him a dose of morphine to relieve his pain and to let him sleep. He now lives on painkillers.
Yassin is also suffering from malnutrition. At Al-Aqsa Hospital in Deir el-Balah, he is not alone. There are malnourished children everywhere here, and doctors say they can't cope.
There is no food, no healthy food, no proper health services in all the Gaza Strip. This leads to more complicated cases.
The UN says children are starving as Israel continues to block the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza. According to the UN, more than 20 children have died of malnutrition in the north alone, and 31% are acutely malnourished. As a result of Israel's war and restrictions that completely contradict international law, Gazans again are on the brink of famine as malnutrition among Palestinians continue to spread so fast due to the lack of all kinds of basic humanitarian and medical supplies, where disease and even malnutrition are a deadly combination. Tareq, Azzoum, Al Jazeera, Deir el-Balah, Palestine.
Ahmed Bayram is the Norwegian Refugee Council's Middle East spokesperson, and he joins us now from Amman, Jordan. Sir, can you give us a sense of just how much aid is getting into Gaza right now?
Very little indeed. A few hundred trucks only have made it since a month. If I speak on behalf of the Norwegian Refugee Council, we haven't had any supplies make it through any of the crossings for the past month now, and we're only, relying on our ever depleting resources on the ground. It's nowhere near enough. We have had big promises that have also, promises of more aid, promises of safety for our aid workers, which my team in Gaza described as a big fallacy. And of course, the closure of the 9 potential crossings is a catastrophe, as you have heard from your reporters. And of course, as we hear on a daily basis from our teams that children are sleeping on the sands because there's no tents left. They are drinking, unsafe water all day long, and they are eating very, very, very little.
Now, facts on the ground are dire, as you've just outlined and as we have been reporting. Should the Rafah border crossing open, do conditions in Gaza even allow for the safe distribution of aid and for the safety of aid workers?
The short answer is no, and I'm going to illustrate it in a few examples of what aid delivery looks like on the ground. I mean, Israel obviously takes forever to inspect trucks. It takes forever to let trucks in. But even when the trucks are in, we don't have fuel to go and bring these trucks into Gaza. If we had the fuel, we don't have the cash because of the liquidity shortage on the ground to pay for these trucks. And let's say we have paid, we have found the cash. It's not safe to take these trucks from point A by the crossing to point B where our houses are. So it's an obstacle course, as my colleagues describe it on the ground. It's not just one factor. It's not a straightforward process anymore. You are working under the bombs, under the rockets, you know, in dangerous, very dangerous roads. You are basically, as an aid worker, just like the rest of the population, putting your life on the line here, and people have been putting their lives on the line to go find some bread or some water. So the short answer is no. Big promises should stop, and we should see concrete action. Concrete action means Israel pulling out of these civilian areas in Rafah, letting aid trucks in, opening all gates possible to let these trucks in, and of course, very important, to allow aid workers to work in the safest environment possible.
But if there is no rollback or change in Israel's policy, what would that mean?
For aid trucks, for aid flow, it means we are working in atrocious circumstances. It's not possible. I can't see how we have to make these journeys back and forth, 18 miles, I think it is, from the Rafah crossing to Khan Yunis or to Bawasi, where aid operations are focused and are concentrated right now. Pressure has to come from Israel's allies and from these talks and other talks behind closed doors. I mean, empty rhetoric really doesn't work anymore. We need action, and that action should come from these big allies of Israel who have been, trying. We've heard. All good rhetoric, but very, very little action, whether that is on aid route or whether that is on the safety of our teams. I think time for action is now, and that could only work if Israel stops attacking Rafah and lets these populations back to where they have been receiving aid, these months.
Ahmed Bayram, a Middle East spokesperson at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you, sir, for your time.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.